a standard haunting. And when the night is calm and the mist rolls in, you can still hear, to this day, the bride and her groom walking the line, but they never make it to their happily ever after.
Whoa! Did that actually happen, Stepney? Asked Green Arrow.
The V2 was visiting the line for the railway's Giants of Steam gala. It's sadly a true story for the most part. The newlyweds were hit by a train while walking the line, and sadly perished.
Is it not a bit insensitive to tell a ghost story about a real incident, then? Remarked Blackmore Vale.
I understand your point of view, but I think it's an interesting way to remember them, as well as promoting safety on the railway. The engines all murmured in agreement.
Does anyone else have a story to tell before we call it a night?
Camelot, the Standard 5, spoke up.
I might have one of interest, and it involves our dear shedmate, Robert.
The engines looked over to Robert, the Standard 4 tender engine, who was fast asleep.
What does Robert have to do with it? Questioned Blackmore Vale. Well, from what I heard, this happened about 40 or so years ago, when Robert was still working on the main line like most of us. The day was wet, and the visibility was poor. Robert had just returned to the yards after taking a slow goods train. His fireman was tired and eager to get home. The grumpy fireman argued with the driver to hurry up. In his haste, he didn't realize Robert's brakes weren't fully on. As the crew walked away from their engine, Robert began to move. The line sloped downhill, which allowed Robert to gather speed. A set of trap points lay ahead, but the track veered into the direction his crew were walking. As he came off the rails, the driver turned to see Robert hurtling towards him. He jumped clear. However, the fireman did not. "What happened?" quivered Blackmore Vale. "Robert turned over a few feet after coming off the rails," Camelot said solemnly. "His fireman was sadly crushed."
The sheds fell silent, everyone's eyes fixated on the sleeping Standard 4. Stepney broke the silence with a question. Why have we not heard about this till now?
If I had had an accident like that, I sure wouldn't want to talk about it, sighed Green Arrow. Or maybe he's not allowed to, Camelot said darkly.
What do you mean?
I don't know if any of you have heard things yourselves, but engines I know that have shared a shed with Robert can swear that when the shed is dead quiet, they can hear what sounds like a person moving around an engine's cab. Other sounds, like coal being shoveled into a firebox or emptying a smoke box, can be heard too. These encounters are often chalked up as a cleaner working late or a firelighter preparing an engine for a morning run. But others believe it's Robert's phantom fireman, refusing to leave and forever tormenting the engine that caused his grim demise.
What poppycock, laughed Fenchurch. Robert's been here for what, 34 years? And we've never heard anything in these sheds.
That's because you haven't been listening out for it, Camelot smirked. Anyway, he yawned, I think that's enough stories for tonight. Good night, all.
And the big mixed traffic engine fell asleep, leaving the other engines to process what they had just heard. The next day, the engines went to work, taking passengers up and down the beautiful Sussex countryside. Most had left the thoughts of Camelot's story in the shed. Blackmore Vale, on the other hand, couldn't shake the thought out of his smokebox. As he entered Horsted Keen Station with a passenger train, he wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. Instead of braking, he continued to pass through the station. Stop, Blackmore! Stop! Whistled Stepney. Blackmore Vale quickly snapped back to reality and braked hard. He came to a sharp stop, one coach overshooting the platform. "Are you okay, Blackmore?" asked Stepney. "It's not like you to lose focus like that."
My apologies, Stepney. I was just a little distracted is all."
"You were thinking of Camelot's story about Robert, weren't you?" The West Country class sighed in agreement. "I wouldn't read too much into it, old chap. I personally think Camelot's made it up."
"I thought that too. But then I realized something. You ever notice that Robert's running board on his left-hand side is misaligned?"
"I can't say that I have."
"Well, something like that is normally from some kind of serious accident, like
"Falling on one's side," Stepney finished gravely. The two engines said no more and went about their work. As the sun dipped below the horizon, evening fell upon the railway. Blackmore Vale had just returned to the sheds to find Robert being steamed up for a late evening dining train. "Had a good run today?" Robert asked his friend. Blackmore Vale was about to answer, but was cut short by an ear-piercing scream, followed by a loud thud. Blackmore Vale's crew rushed over to find a cleaner lying on the coal in Robert's tender and looking quite pale. "Is everything okay?" asked the driver. "I was cleaning Robert's controls," stammered the cleaner. "But when I looked through the cab window on the fireman's side, I saw someone I didn't recognize looking me right in the face. I stumbled back and fell onto the coal in the tender." "You must have just seen your reflection," theorized the driver. The cleaner, still in a state of confusion, walked off to clean one of the other engines.
"What was that about?"
asked Blackmore Vale. Robert didn't respond straight away. "It's probably nothing," he finally said, without making eye contact with the bigger engine beside him. He sharply puffed away, leaving Blackmore Vale with even more questions than he already had. Later that night, Robert returned to the sheds after taking the dining train. All of the other engines were fast asleep. All but Blackmore Vale, who was merely pretending to be. He watched through squinted eyes as Robert's crew dumped his fire and checked him over before retiring for the evening. The sheds fell silent. Only the sound of crickets chirping could be heard in the grass outside. But as Blackmore Vale was about to call his investigation off, the sound of footsteps echoed around the shed. A deep chill ran down his boiler as the temperature of the shed suddenly dipped. Blackmore Vale continued to listen as he heard what sounded like someone climbing into the cab of an engine and starting to clean around the controls. As he began to ponder a logical explanation to the sounds he was hearing, he jumped as he heard what sounded like someone jumping down from the cab. At last, Blackmore Vale found the courage to open his eyes. When he did, he was met with the sight of what looked like a pale-skinned fireman gazing up at him. He was about to scream in sheer terror when— "Don't be frightened, old friend. I can explain everything." Blackmore Vale looked to his side to see Robert staring at him intently. "I see you've met Robbie," chuckled the Standard Four, looking down at the man before them.
"I guess I have,"
came the bewildered reply. Robert laughed. "Camelot's story has some truth to it, but what he didn't know was what type of fireman Robbie here truly was."
"And, what type of fireman was he?"
asked Blackmore Vale, still a little nervous of the situation at hand. Robert looked longingly at the figure before them. "One of the best," he said, with a small tear running down his face. "He always put me first instead of anyone else, even himself." On that sad, fateful day, a foolish shunter sneakily climbed into my cab and tried to drive me. I started with a bump, which threw the shunter off of my footplate. Robbie noticed I was in trouble and ran back to try and stop me, but I'm sorry to say he was too late. You sadly already know the outcome." Blackmore Vale looked at Robbie, who gave him a shy smile before looking down to the ground. "I've told Robbie numerous times that he doesn't need to hang around, but every time I do, he just wags his fingers at me and continues on with whatever he's doing. I am sorry if he scared you." "No need to worry, dear friend. I completely understand," reassured Blackmore Vale. "If anything, I should apologize for misunderstanding. I hope you can forgive me too, Robbie." Robbie responded with an enthusiastic thumbs up. He then waved goodbye to the two engines as he walked down the end of the shed and faded away into the darkness. "Is that why you—" asked Blackmore Vale, but he decided not to continue, as Robert had peacefully fallen asleep. When the other engines heard the real story of Robert's phantom fireman, they respectfully put an end to the topic of ghosts on the line, and everyone continued on as if nothing had happened. But whenever it is late, and the sound of an engine being attended to can be heard in the shed, they need not worry, as it is only a kind old man looking after an engine, which will always be close to his heart.